Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome and thank you for participating in today's session. The Cornwall Business Enterprise Center has an ongoing seminar series, and we try to cover as many different kinds of topics as possible. Today's session is going to focus on succession planning. My name is Shauna Baggs, and I'm the business consultant at the Cornwall Business Enterprise Center. And we help entrepreneurs across the city of Cornwall, Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, and Akwesasne with all different kinds of business questions and helping them grow. And in this case, helping make a plan for next stage in life. Today's session will cover a variety of different ways that you can plan for succession planning. You never know what opportunities are going to knock on your door. In the chat, please include your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have some time towards the end for a discussion and to go over all the questions that you may have. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Danielle Walsh. Danielle is joining us today from MNP's private enterprise team in Ottawa. She's a trusted advisor that helps family businesses with intergenerational succession planning while supporting both family harmony and long-term success of their business to safeguard their legacy for generations to come. Danielle works with family businesses of all sizes in all industries, as well as with non-family owned businesses. She advises clients on management and ownership succession, family communication, governance, readying the next generation to take over, and exit strategies. She helps the whole family understand and support the overall plan, create transparency, and open the door to honest communication. Danielle has earned a Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting at the University of Ottawa, a certificate in Family Business Advising, and certificate in Family Wealth Advising from the Family Firm Institute in 2013. She's a chartered professional accountant and qualifying as chartered accountant in 2013. So welcome, Danielle, and I will pass off the reins to you.
Well, thank you so much, Shauna. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for joining us over your lunch hour. So I hope you're all enjoying something very tasty. I'm happy to be here to talk to you about succession planning. I know with COVID, the last few years, planning in general has been put on the back burner, but even more so succession planning, as everyone's just been trying to survive. Of course, thinking about your retirement and transitioning your business and all these things haven't really been at the forefront. So my goal today is really just to, bring succession planning back to the front of your radar and to give you, a few tidbits of where you can start, what do you need to be thinking about, and give you kind of a path forward if that's something that's on your radar. And if it's not for the next few years, then at least when you are ready, you'll have a better sense of where to start. So we're going to talk today about the basics. What do you need to know? But something else I want to touch on is there are so many reasons when I meet with my clients and they tell me, oh, well, succession planning's not right now, or we're gonna think about it in a few years. And what's funny is you need a succession plan virtually all the time, whether it's for death, incapacity, or for retirement. And so there's a few things I've realized over time, having worked with so many business owners, that there are certain items that because they're uncomfortable talking about it or dealing with it, it tends to stall the overall succession process. And so one of the ones I wanted to talk about is the loss of identity. So for a founder, their identity is so intensely intertwined with that of the business, they don't know who they are without that business. So I had a client, she built her business over 35 years. And when her and I were kind of talking about, what are your next steps? She said, Danielle, I realized that I have my business, I have my family, and I have no hobbies, nothing. So what am I doing in retirement? I have no idea. And so we talked about it. She says, well, I do enjoy golfing. And I said, okay, great. Let's use that as a starting point. And then she called me very late one evening and she's like, did you know I only golf with business acquaintances? I don't know if those are my friends. Are they gonna golf with me if I'm no longer the president and owner of this business? I don't know anymore. And this was creating so much animosity and so much fear that she'd put succession planning on the back burner for years, because she was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing after that. And if nobody wants to spend time with me and my adult kids are out of the house, what am I doing? So then I'm just not going to think about it. And so that's what we want to try to avoid. Another funny example of this I had is this was with a family business. We had everything planned. We'd spent a year working out the succession plan. We're at the signing of all the legal documents. We've decided with this family to have a big party at the same time. And the dad pulls me aside and I was like, this can't be good. And he says, Daniela, I'm not sure that I'm ready. How are the next customers, suppliers, how are they going to know I started this? My son-in-law is going to be the one answering the door now, answering the emails. He's going to be the one giving presentations and part of all these organizations. Who am I going to be? And after a few more, conversations about it in that one afternoon, I realized he just wanted people to know that he was the one that started this. And his thought was, if I'm not there every day, no one's going to know. No one's going to remember what I did. So the solution was for him was very simple. He just wanted a portrait of himself in the boardroom so that everyone that came into the boardroom would know that was his legacy that they were going to get to participate in. And so this loss of identity, whether it's a portrait, whether it's kind of finding different friends, different hobbies, it's something that a lot of business owners aren't expecting. You expect, yeah, the loss of control, that's going to be tough. You're expecting maybe your retirement isn't exactly as planned, but a lot of people don't realize how intensely tied their identity is with the business and how difficult letting that is going to be. So letting that go is much harder than anticipated. Not being ready to retire. This is funny. Shauna and I were just talking about this. We always hear freedom 55, freedom 65. I always think when I'm going to retire, I'm going to be, sitting on a beach with a supersized margarita, listening to the waves. And yet when I speak to most of my clients that are business owners, that's not at all their definition of retirement. They want to be working. And I have a number of clients who are in their 90s that they still go into work on a regular basis now. Like, I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure what they do all day when they're there, but what I do know is that they are highly valued and appreciated by the people around them. Now, that's feasible. The clients that I have that are in their 90s, they're no longer owners, they're no longer participating in the day-to-day management, but they are participating in what they like to do. So one of my clients who's 91, he still goes into work, but his bread and butter is product development. So he's no longer an owner, he's just there as an advisor to the next generation, and he doesn't participate in decision making, but he focuses on what he loves, which is developing new products. So it's funny, like when you go find him now, he's like in a basement tinkering with things, and it's very funny, but that's what he wants to be doing. So in his retirement, for him, it was, I want to retire from the management duties, I want to retire from ownership. What I want to do is just what I love. And so that's what he's doing. Now, that's much easier to achieve when you're transitioning to a family member, because of course they're going to be more willing to accommodate than, say, a third party that you're going to sell to. But that's something you need to start thinking about. What does your retirement look like? And based on your succession options, is that feasible? Because if it's not, you're much better off to start kind of adjusting your expectations now. I spoke to a nice gentleman who sold his business. He just got the offer of a lifetime that he wasn't quite ready for. He accepted it. And I spoke to him 2 months later, and he didn't know what to do with himself. He was depressed. His wife would call me and be like, we need to do something because he's losing his marbles, because she was still working and his kids were gone, and he would wake up every morning and go to the business and do that work, but now he didn't have that anymore, and he didn't know what to do with himself. And so that transition was very difficult on him because it came out of the blue. And then he realized, oh man, I'm never going to be one to retire. So then he actually started another business, believe it or not. But it was out of this necessity of like, I can't sit at home and be doing nothing. This is not for me. So that was something that, not being ready to retire, sometimes we think we might be, or this opportunity comes up, you need to make sure that you kind of have a plan for that. So this desire to keep working can sometimes stop everyone from planning their succession because they think, oh, well, if I'm succession planning, retirement must be near. But it doesn't mean that at all. A loss of control, of course, especially if you're a sole owner, you've run this business, you've made every single decision. You don't have to run it by anybody. You don't have to listen to anybody else. So of course, the day you're going to, sell your business either to a third party, to your management team, or to a family member, and you're losing that control, especially if you're going to be present to see the decision making that's happening, that's maybe not in line with how you would make decisions, that can be really difficult. And because of that, oftentimes we see people, they just don't want to plan for it. And so these are all items that I see that kind of cause my clients to stick their head in the sand. They do what I call like the ostrich, and they're like, I'm going to stick my head in the sand. I'm not going to deal with these issues, and it's going to eventually go away. But the truth is, the longer you wait to succession plan, the less options you're going to have. And then that brings me to mortality. Often when I talk to clients about succession planning, they're like, oh, Danielle, you must mean the end is near. Of course not. I think, just because you need to have a succession plan, you should always have a plan for death or incapacity, whether you're 25, 45, or 85. If you don't have a plan for that, then your business and your family are going to suffer significantly. And that is something that we see happening far too often. And so often I find clients don't like to think about this if it's thinking about their death, or they think that, when they're going to retire, if they only want to retire when they're in their late 90s, that then it's going to be close to, the time where they might be passing. And so succession planning is becoming something that has so many emotions and feelings intertwined that it is much easier to shove it in the back of the closet and just be like, I'm going to live forever. I'm going to keep running this business with full control for the rest of my life. However, that might not be what your whole family wants either, especially, your spouse, if you guys have plans to travel in retirement. And that's something that's interesting. Often I speak to a spouse and they'll be like, we're going to travel, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And I speak to the business owner and they're like, oh, we never agreed to that. I'm going to work, right? So you need to make sure that all that's in line. And then finally, feuds. What I find is really upsetting for me is, as a business owner, you spent 35 years, 30 years, whatever it is, building this business. You've put so much time and effort. The fact that you got past those first 5 years where, 95% of businesses don't get there, you got there, you moved it, you grew it. And then when it should be the time to celebrate, you're exiting. It tends to be rife with conflict, whether you're transitioning it to a family member and other families don't understand, they don't think it's fair, and there's conflict there, or to a management team, but not the entire management team, because not everybody can afford it or do it or has the skills. Or maybe it's not now looking to turn out the way that you thought it would, or you do a third-party sale and that's not exactly what you expected. Or if you have business partners and you want to exit, but they're not ready to exit, so how do you get your money out? What if we don't agree? What we're seeing is this trend that the exit is negative, and it should be the most positive. We should be benefiting from 35 years of amazing work, and we should be able to celebrate it. But instead, we're seeing that when business owners are trying to exit their business, irrespective of the option they choose, it turns out to be a really difficult and negative experience. And it tends to sour. I mean, I've seen people who were best friends running their business for 35 years, and then when it comes to the exit, that relationship sours. If you've made it 35 years of business decisions and all these things, you have to be able to work that out. That's also why you want a succession plan in place. It's much easier to negotiate something before we're there than when one of us is there and now we all have our self-interest at heart. So these are some of the challenges that I see that are stalling people from even considering to put a succession plan in place. So these are just things to consider. And if you experience them, you should just realize it's normal. It's normal to not be sure what you want in retirement. It's normal to not love losing control. Nobody likes that. It's normal to not want conflict, but if we just avoid it, you're just going to have more conflict down the road. So when do you need to start? Like I said earlier, it is never too soon, but it certainly can be too late. You want to be planning at least 5 years out. And I mean, that is, the bare minimum, because as we're going to go through the presentation today, you're going to hear, if you want to maximize your options, if you want the most options to your disposal, the longer your planning period, the more options you're going to have, which means if plan A to C don't work, hey, as long as we have all the way to Z, we have options. But the sooner the longer you wait, and the closer to that date you are, the less likely it is going to be that it's going to be successful and positive. So even if you're thinking, well, I want to work until I'm, in my 80s and I'm currently 50, you could still use a plan right now. And you should always have one for death and incapacity. For a number of years, I worked with my dad, and I heard my dad say to all his clients, you have a moral obligation to put a plan in place for death and incapacity, a moral obligation, so that your family is not left in the lurch and the business that you spent so many years building can survive. So when do we start? Now. So what are your options? So you can transition your business to a family member. That's if you have family members that are interested. You can transition your business to your management team in a form of a management buyout. Doesn't mean that every manager has to participate. You just need to make sure that you have a management team that is competent and committed. And the nice part about that is if they share your values and they've seen how you work, that can be an easier way to kind of let go and relinquish that control. Or you can do a sale to a third party. So we're going to be talking about some things that you need to consider in general for succession planning. And if ever it pertains more to one of these options, I'll let you know as we move through. So what are some questions you need to consider? So even if you're miles away from, retirement or succession planning, what are things that you need to start thinking about? Well, the first one is, what do I plan to do after I sell my business? And this is like that example I spoke about before, where the gentleman, he sold his business and he just wasn't ready for it. You know, he had all this money, he had all this time and nothing to do with it. And so you need to be emotionally and psychologically prepared. And that's really difficult for some. And then you also want to look at, is it in line with your spouse or partner's plans? That's certainly going to help. If we're, you know, if our retirement plans are about the same place, then our plan is to travel, then that certainly can make it easier to swallow. Is it in line with your retirement plans? If you don't want to retire for the next 10 years and you get an offer to sell today and they want you out, well, what are you going to do? And that's something that we often don't think about. Everyone thinks once you sold it, you're golden. But if your retirement is working 3 days a week, like most of my clients are, you know, I have a lot of them that, you know, might spend 4 months in Florida and then come home and they want to work 4 days a week. Well, if you sell your business and that's not built into your agreement, that might not be something you can do. So if you're transitioning to a family member or even to a management team, that might be more feasible. Will selling my business provide me with enough money to retire? So if you do not have a good financial advisor that'll give you a detailed financial plan, you need one. You need a financial plan with all that, you know, actuarial science of how long we're going to live, the cost of living, where it's going to go. We all want to make sure that we have enough money to retire in the way that we want, but also to be able to be put in like a nice home. You know, my grandma is 98. A few years ago, we had to put her in a home and it is extremely expensive. So you want to make sure, you know, you've built this business, you've built this wealth. Let's make sure that you have what you need to take care of yourself and your family into retirement and then past that. So how much money do you need to have the retirement of your dreams? For some of us, it's more, for some of us, it's less, depending on our lifestyle. But the important thing is knowing, where am I? You know, your financial advisor can give you a financial plan based on, you know, today's scenario. And then if you sell your business for X, this is what it looks like. So having that financial plan as a baseline can certainly help you make an informed decision. What is the value of the business? If you really need your business to be worth 4 million in order to have the retirement of your dreams, and it's currently worth 1.5, well, you've got a bit of a gap there. But if you had a 10-year planning horizon, there are services and advisors that can help you, that their whole, you know, philosophy and everything they do is help businesses go from here to here, so that when you sell it, you get the value that you need. So again, that's why that planning horizon, the longer out you plan, the more options it gives you, the better your retirement planning is going to be. If you know, I need it to be at that 4 million, I've got 10 years. Okay, let's start plotting away at that. And maybe instead of 4, you'll be at 6. But at least you'll be at that baseline that you really needed. So that's something that's important to really start considering now. Selling your business, am I key to the business? And this is always a whopper of a question, you know, and I always have some people like, no, I'm not that vital. No, I'm not that vital. But these are the people that when they go on vacation, they spend more time on their phone and laptop than they do when they're in the office, you know, because every question, every email comes their way. So if the business can't operate without you, obviously you're a great business person, but the problem with that is the more valuable you are to the business, the less valuable your business is. Because that means if I buy your business, but you're a key part in it, and eventually you're going to leave, that's not super appealing as to a buyer. So the business needs to have less personal goodwill, so the value that's tied to you, and more business goodwill. But again, if you're like, oh no, if you're sitting there and you're like, holy smokes, I'm vital, I do everything. I get it. When you start a business, you are everything from janitor to president to travel agent to product development, HR, finance, you do it all. So of course you're a vital piece of it. So if that's the case and you do have a longer, you know, horizon to sell your business, whether it's to your family, to a management team, or to a third party, you need to start kind of professionalizing and transitioning your key customer relationships, your business knowledge to your management team. All of a sudden, if the value of the business is not tied to you and it's tied to the business, you're going to be able to pick up a higher value. So this is something that you want to consider. You know, when you think about it, if you went to your local Tim Hortons and the ownership had switched, you would never even know. I mean, there are Tim Hortons in my area that have been there longer than I've been alive. And I'm assuming that's not one owner. It could have gone through 3, 4, 5 owners. Yet we always have the same, you know, it's the same donuts, the same coffee, the same everything. In a local business, that's often not the case. If I started a cafe and then I left, chances are it would be very different. The customers would notice. And that's what this is all about. So you need to start getting it a bit more professionalized so that if you want to sell your business, not that we're going to be as streamlined as Tim Hortons, but the idea is that if someone else came in, they can run the business in a similar way to you without needing you on hand. Are my business policies and processes well documented? So this is as part of what we were just talking about. Let's professionalize. Let's make sure you have policies and processes. You have that employee manual, you have the handbooks. These are all things that when a buyer looks at it and is going to say, wow, yeah, I can pick up this business and move it forward. Same thing if you're going to be selling it to your management team or family. You know, it's very scary for a next generation or for a management team to try to do what someone who's been in it for 35 years, started it, has their finger in every pot and excels at all of it. We don't all have the same skill set. So the more policies, procedures we can put in place, the easier it is for someone to pick it up, which also means if ever death or incapacity were to occur, the more of these things we have down on paper, the easier it is for someone to pick up the ball and keep it moving for us. Are my financial statements in order? And I love this one. Whenever I talk about it, some of my clients are like, so do you mean I should stop paying for my cottage roof from the business? I'm like, well, if you're looking to sell in the near future, it may be a good idea to clean that up. You know, of course, we always want to follow proper accounting policies. I would never tell you otherwise. But, you know, as a single owner, I know a lot of my clients get to use the perks of ownership and they kind of do what they want with it. And I'm not here to tell you to not do that. I'm just saying before you sell, especially to a third party or a management team, your family will probably let it slide because they've also been benefiting from that. But if you're going to sell to a third party or your management team, you want to clean up your financial statements because errors can really scare a buyer away. If this is an error, what else is there? And then they're going to want to dig deeper. And, you know, it doesn't take much to scare a buyer away, especially if the financial statements may not be properly reflective of your revenues or your income stream. So let's make sure that, you know, a few years before you're looking to sell, you make sure that all that is clean and proper. So, I mean, not everyone's favorite piece of advice that I give, but it's definitely worthwhile to not scare away potential buyers. Am I willing to stay on for a transition period? And this is something that is difficult. So a transition period, if you're selling to a third party, can be a few months to several years. And it tends to be much harder than people anticipate. So I had a client and she sold her business and she was asked to stay on for a transition period of 3 years. 2 months in, she was struggling. She would call me, her husband would call me, her kids would call me. She was so unhappy because the employees would go to her and say, hey, here's an issue we're having. She'd say, okay. So she'd go to the new owners and say, hey, this is what's happening. I think we should do this. And they'd be like, no, we're going to do it this way. So she had no control, but she was in the business she built with the employees she hired, and she had no means of changing the decisions. And so for her, it became so stressful because she felt like she was letting her customers down, her employees down, and then she ended up having a major stroke due to stress. And so then we ended up being able to get her out of the transition period for health reasons, which is obviously not an ideal way of doing it. But it's to say you need to think this transition period through. Now, it doesn't mean all transition periods are awful. I've had some clients where the whole family, the family business sold to a third party and the whole family continued to work there and they did it for 2 years. And then the parents left, but the next gen were all allowed to stay for, you know, as long as their careers they wanted to, and it worked tremendously well. It doesn't mean it's always going to be negative. It's just to say, again, it hurts my soul when people are transitioning out and then the last few months, few years are super negative. So there are things you can do to deal with this. One of my best friends lives in New York and she sold her business. And when her and I were talking about it, she thought, oh, I'll nail the transition period. You know, it's going to be fine. It was 3 years long. And I said, you know, just do yourself a favor, put in a discount. For any month you leave early, they can reduce the purchase price by X. And so if you leave 3 years early, your purchase price will be diminished a little bit, but you'll have your sanity. You can work elsewhere and do all these things. And sure enough, within the first year, she was at her wit's end and gone. And she said it wasn't the discount, totally worth it because her sanity was going out the window because she didn't like watching other people make decisions for her employees, for her staff. And it was just not going in the direction she wanted. So something to consider. If you're going to sell your business and you have to have an agreement, of course, in that agreement, you can say, I want a shorter transition period, maybe the price will be lower. You want a longer one, maybe make sure that there is a way out, so you're not forced to stay if it's miserable. Selling your business should be like a courtship. You'll want to find someone that's got similar values, similar ideas, going to treat your employees the way you want. And if you can't, then let's make sure that you have a way out and that you build that into your financial plan. So if we knew that to have the retirement of your dreams, you needed to sell your business at 4 million and they offered you 5, then we have some wiggle room to reduce that transition period if you have to take that discount because you need to leave. Again, the benefit of pre-planning. So we have this all sorted out. Who are your potential buyers? So this is where you have to look at, do you have family members that are interested? Are there a management team in your organization that's interested? 1 or 2 of them? Is there multiple of them? Do they get along? You're gonna wanna make sure of that. Is it your competitor? Is it a third party that you don't know? There's pros and cons of each of these that you need to consider. If you transition it to a family member, chances are your retirement of working till you're 90 is going to be way more feasible than if you sell it to a third party when you're 70. They're probably not going to allow for a 20-year transition period of you doing whatever you want. Less likely. But again, these are the things that you need to consider way ahead of time to make sure you get that retirement, you get that transition that you want. So what does that mean for us now? Selling your business, how do we get there? You know, what's the advice that you need? You need a lot of advice to get there. And this is what's interesting. I find business owners spend so much time and resources and they get advisors to help them build their business and get it to the point of success, and then exiting where you actually get to benefit from your 35 years of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. They don't get all the advice that they need. They don't put all their ducks in a row. And then they don't end up maximizing it, which is too bad because you've all worked too hard to not get that. So what's the advice you need? So I'm a succession planner. So I specialize in helping family businesses ensure that they can maintain family harmony. But I also work with businesses of all types and sizes in helping them ensure that their succession plan works as a whole. How do you make sure that your retirement and financial plan works with your accounting plan, with your legal plan, with what you desire, what your family wants, putting that all together and quarterbacking that process to ensure that all the advisors work together. When I speak to a lot of potential clients, they tell me, oh, Danielle, I have a succession plan. I'm like, oh yeah, what do you have? I have a will. Great, good start. We all need one. And I have some life insurance. Okay, but that's really not a succession plan. So this is where you have to start considering all those questions. How is your plan going to work together? And so sometimes I have clients that do have more of a succession plan, but the accounting piece doesn't work with the legal piece, which is completely opposite of what the retirement plan says. And then when I speak to them and what they want to do is not at all reflective in any of those. So you need to make sure that if you're going to start putting all these pieces in place, because it's expensive to do it, I get it. You want to make sure then that at least they're working together. All your advisors should be working together. My job with all of my clients is to quarterback that process and ensure that everything works together and that ultimately it reflects what they wanted. And that's what's most important. You need to have the exit, the transition as much as possible that you want because you've earned it. So you need an accountant. There is no getting out of that. And I mean, I'm a CPA by trade, but I don't do any accounting. I realized once I did my CA exams that I hated accounting, just a little late on that front. So if you need an accountant, they're going to help you minimize taxes, especially if you're selling your business. There are a lot of strategies that you can use to minimize taxes and keep more money in your pocket. We're going to talk about that. But again, good planning takes time. You're also going to need a specialized type of accountant, a certified business valuator, to determine the value of your business. And I'll give you a bit more information about that as well. You're going to need a lawyer. You want to make sure that your estate plan, so your wills, your powers of attorney, that all works in conjunction with your succession plan. You know, if you have a business partner, a lot of my clients I realize that have business partners, I'm like, well, if you become incapacitated, who's your power of attorney for your property to make business decisions? Well, it's my spouse. Does your business partner know that? Because I mean, if I think about it, like I love my sister, but if her and I owned a business together and I had to inherit her spouse, an in-law would quickly become an outlaw. He's great, don't get me wrong. But do we want to be making decisions together? Maybe not. So these are things you want to be considering. A wealth advisor, you need to make sure you have a really good detailed financial plan that outlines what are your needs, What if the value of your business changes? If it goes up, it goes down, what does that mean for you? What are things you can do? And it's, it's really complex. So you need someone to do it. I had a client who said, Danielle, I'm really good at math. I can do my financial plan. And I was like, well, do you know all the rules about CPP, OAS? Do you know how you're going to deal with inflation? And so after a month where he gave me it was like a little spreadsheet, and he's like, yeah, okay, I think I'm out of my depth. And then he got a real financial plan, and he was like, yeah, I never realized how detailed it would be. But on the flip side, his spouse said, it's the first time in my life I am comfortable with where we are financially. Because finally someone did all the math for you till you're like 98. And what does that mean? And if one of you dies at 70, this is what the taxes mean. This is what's going to happen. It's all worked out there. And so often the financial plan can also help the whole family get a bit of comfort around that. So these are the advisors that you need. And you just need to make sure that they're willing to all work together. That's the key. So valuations. What do you need to know? Now, keep in mind, I am not a certified business valuator, so I am just going to be giving you some high level information, because I think a lot of people don't have the basic information on valuation. So that when they do call the CBV, so the Certified Business Valuator, they're a bit surprised. So I thought I'd give you kind of the Coles notes, but keep in mind, this is not my area of expertise. So there are three types or three options when you want to get a valuation. And this is something that most of my clients had no idea. So you have number one, which is just a calculation. This is the simplest way, it's the simplest report, and it's honestly just going to be a calculation based on your financial statements. We're not looking at the market, we're not looking at your growth potential, we're just doing some calculations on those financial statements. Another reason to not want to be deducting your cottage roof from the business at that point in time. The other option is an estimate. So this is a mid-range level report. You're obviously going to have a higher level with this number, with this one, with the estimate. There's going to be some review, some corroboration, some looking at growth potential. And then the comprehensive one is the highest level of detail. It's much more common in complex situations. This is going to give you the highest level of detail and assurance. Now, most of my clients, they use number two, because to be honest, if I'm going to do just a calculation, I could do that. So, not the most useful in my opinion. But estimate, this is one that most people use for acquisitions. If someone's going to acquire a business, this is the valuation that they're typically going to get, because it's mid-range. Comprehensive, like I said, is mainly for litigation. So, and it's much more expensive. Of course, as you go from number one to number three is much more expensive than number two, which is more expensive than number one. So something that's interesting is, the number one things that brings businesses to court is valuations. So what always surprises me is that in a shareholders agreement, it very rarely says, when one of us exits, we're going to get a valuation. That's normal, but it never says, well, what kind? Because if I'm exiting, I might be like, give me comprehensive. We have tons of growth. We're in a growing market. Give me the most expensive one, because it's likely going to take all these things in consideration, give me a higher value. While the business partner that I'm leaving behind might be like, let's just do the math on the financial statements, because that's going to give us a lower price. We won't have to pay her out as much. And so all of a sudden, not only are we having an issue with what the value of the business is, we don't even agree on the method to determine it. And this can be a major stumbling block. So if you have a shareholders agreement that says when somebody exits, we're going to use a certified business valuator, and there we are going to use the estimate report, then all of a sudden we have one less area of conflict, which can be key. So just keep that in mind. So all of my clients, when we rework their shareholders agreement, they actually add a little, schedule to their shareholders agreement that says we're using the estimate, and they add a schedule that actually outlines the calculation is this, estimate is this, comprehensive is this, and the estimate is the one that we're using, and we all agree. That way you minimize conflict, and you know what to expect when you're exiting, and you know that you're getting the mid-range of kind of, assurance without having tons of cost behind it. The other thing to keep in mind is valuations are not a science. They are in art form. So I have some clients in their shareholders agreement that'll say, if I want to exit and we get a valuation and one of us isn't happy with it, the other person can get a valuation. So we each get an estimate report by two different CBVs based on the same assumptions, same information. We get them to present it on the same day. And I have seen it where the value is 100% different. Think about that. So one person's telling me my business is worth 1 million and the other person is telling me 2 million, and they are both doing great jobs. It's just that it is not a mathematical equation, unless you go the calculation, then we should all get the same. But when you're going for what's it worth in the market, it's like when you have real estate agents come to your house and tell you what your house is worth. You get a large range. When I sold my last house, I had 3 people come and I had, a $250,000 difference in the house price. And I was like, well, I don't know where to go now. So keep that in mind. So with valuation, some of my clients will say, okay, if the two that we get, if there's a bigger than 10% difference between the mid-range of both, we'll get a third. And then the average of all three will be binding. And then you can tell yourself, you've done the best you can to get a fair value. And I think that's important to keep in mind. We want to make sure when you're retiring, when you're exiting, you're getting as fair as a value as possible, because you have built this business. You need to be able to feel confident that you've done everything you can to get a fair value there. So I'm also going to quickly talk to you about the 3 main approaches to valuations. Again, not a CBEC, but there's income-based, and this is used for operating companies. This looks at why people go into business, which is to make money. So this looks at what kind of money will the business make in the future, what kind of money it'll bring in, and it assesses the risk associated to it. This makes me think of, Dragon's Den and Shark Tank, when people come in and they're like, my business is worth 7 million. And they're like, okay, so how much revenue do you have? Because we're expecting a lot of revenue if you think your value is 7 million. And they're like, oh, I have none. And then they tell them that that's not going to work. So this is really looking at, when you hear about cap rates, 3 times earnings, this is the income-based approach. It's used for operating companies. It's essentially looking at what is the value today of the future benefits that your business, the money it can bring in, keeping in mind the risks associated. This is the one that's going to be used the most often. Market-based is really for public companies. It's looking at, is there a market to look at, is there similar businesses that have been sold at what price, and looking at that. It's kind of like selling a house in a real estate market. That's how I kind of look at it. And then the asset-based approach, this is actually going to look at a business, and it's going to look at its assets and liabilities, and it's going to look at the balance sheet and adjust each asset for its market value. So it's going to look at it and say, is it obsolete? Is it worn out? Or what's the actual value of this asset? And this is generally used for real estate and investment companies, where of course it's a little bit easier to determine the value of those assets. But again, typically you're going to be using the income-based, which is going to be like 3 times earnings or something like that. There's going to be an industry-specific like rate that is used. But it's important to know that there's different approaches, because if you expect one and then you find out that there's others, I don't want you to be surprised. So just keep that in mind as well. So as I said, mathematical certainty is not demanded, nor indeed is it possible, which is why valuations cause so much conflict amongst everyone, and it's kind of like when you're selling your house, you're like, oh, my house is worth so much. And then you have real estate agents come to your house and give you a whole, gambit of values, but it's not the value you wanted. It's the same, although like in Ottawa right now, it probably is, given all the issues to buy a home out here. But, that's the general idea, is we often think our business is worth more, which is why it's a good idea to get a certified business valuator to actually come in and determine it. And it's also a good idea to make sure that you have some form of valuation methodology, that if you do have partners that you're going to be exiting from, that they know what that methodology is, so that you all agree. Otherwise, there's nothing worse than having someone trying to negotiate what kind of valuation, what do we take into consideration, and all these things when someone wants out, because then of course I'm going to want the highest value possible, and the people in the business is going to want the lowest value possible. So the last thing I want to talk about is, once you have the value of that business, we want to keep more money in your pocket because you've earned it. So we don't want to be sending it all to the CRA, and they could take upwards of 40%. So keep in mind, you can minimize that significantly, but good tax planning takes lots of time. Are there assets in the business you don't want to sell? So if you have properties, real estate, or investments even that have been sitting in the business that you think, you know what, I'd like to keep those for the long term, and in my retirement, I'll get rid of them slowly. That requires tax planning. How do you get them out? What does that change? Again, you need time to figure that out. Are you able to sell the shares of your company as opposed to the assets? So the major benefit of being able to sell shares is that you're actually going to be able to use that capital gains exemption that we all hear about, we all want to use. But if you sell the assets of your business, that's not an option. So I met a client who was in the restaurant industry, where I didn't know this initially. typically they sell the assets, not the shares. And they had spent years making sure they were on side in order to get their capital gains exemption, when really that wasn't even a relevant point for them because no one was going to buy their shares. It was going to be an asset sale. So you want to make sure that you know, if we are going to make sure that we qualify for those things, that that's something that's likely to happen. Otherwise, again, you're going to be wasting time and resources. So if you sell your shares, then every shareholder can access their capital gains exemption, which in 2022 is $913,630,000. So great. We all want to use our capital gains exemption, but in order to use that $913,000, we need to be a qualifying small business corporation, which means you have to meet certain criteria for 2 years. And if in that 2 years, all of a sudden you blip out of it, you got to restart, right? So you want to make sure that you have this planning to a T. So again, you can't say, you know what, I'm ready to retire now. I'd like to get out in the next 12 months. That's not going to leave you with the result that you want. And then finally, do you need money, you know, all at once, or are you better off if you could get it over time? Because if there is taxes to pay, there may be options to use multiple years of your marginal tax rate. So that can also help. But again, that requires planning and time. So if I can leave you with anything today, it's that number one, you need to start thinking about those questions that we discussed. And Shauna is going to be kind enough to send an email afterwards with a link to an article that reiterates these questions. So if you're sitting there panicking about, I don't remember all the questions, don't worry about it. You will also have access to these slides, so you'll also have them there. Step two, make sure you have a retirement or a financial plan. Make sure that you are comfortable with your financial planner, that they're really good at it. You want to make sure that you don't have someone that is just an investment advisor. You want to make sure you can get that detailed, comprehensive financial plan so that you can see where you're at. Can I retire the way that I want? Do I need to sell my business for 10 million or can I sell it at 1? And if it's currently worth 1, I'm good to go. But if it's currently worth, 500,000 and I need to up it in the next 5 years, now we know where to go. So then you need to determine the value of your business. It doesn't mean that today, if you're not selling for the next 10 years, that you need to pay a CBEC to come in. You can probably ask your accountant for an estimate that'll be close, because you don't want to spend money if you don't have to on getting a valuation. But then based on all those 3 steps, those questions, your plan, the value of your business, you should be able to identify your next steps and then start your planning process. Who are you going to sell it to? What are your options? Do I need to grow the business in the next 10 years? Am I vital to it? Can I not leave on vacation? I have clients that haven't left on vacation for 10 years. So you're vital to it. So now we have to start that transition period. Great way to know if you've actually mastered, transitioning that knowledge over is if you can take a vacation. Novel idea. And then you got to plan for it. You got to plan for all of it. So I know that I just threw a lot at all of you, but I'd love to know if there's any questions or comments or anything I can help with in the last few minutes.
Thanks, Danielle. That was a lot of really great information. There's a couple of things that I brought to my attention that I never even considered. Was the shares versus the assets. I don't think I ever really even thought about it in that way before, but that's an important way to think when you're doing your evaluation.
Well, for sure. And like some buyers are going to prefer to purchase assets because then there's no liabilities. There's no threats of lawsuits. Like if I just purchase assets from you, I'm done. Right? As opposed to if I'm buying the shares, anything that you were potentially liable for before, I'm buying your whole company, the liabilities, any lawsuits, any issues. So there's a bit more of a risk there, from that standpoint. So a lot of times people assume they're going to sell their shares and it's not necessarily the case. So it's a good thing to know. And there's certain industries where it's of course going to happen. And there's certain industries where it's not. And if you don't know that, how are you supposed to, figure that out?
Yeah, that's definitely something to consider. I didn't notice any questions yet in the chat, but if there's anybody who has a question, they're welcome to put it in the chat or just take yourself off mute and you can pose the question in our discussion forum. So now there's lots of information.
Well, and if you ever think of a question after the fact, I'm always happy to answer anything by email, or if you get back to Shauna, I'm sure Shauna can let me know if there's something that I can provide information on.
Yes, thank you, Danielle. Yeah, and like Danielle mentioned, I will be sharing an article which MNP provided that will help kind of put in perspective the presentation. You'll also be welcome to view the slides again, and we'll send those out as well. And if you have questions, you're welcome to contact me, and I'll also provide Danielle's contact information as well. So either way, if you're going back and thinking about something later on and you have a question to pose, then either contact myself or Danielle. So with that being said, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a great day. I think it's warm today, but they're calling for a little bit of snow tomorrow. So get your fresh air while you can. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Don't be scared.